What's up, guys? Welcome back to this brand new series of videos. And in this second episode, all about video directors, we're going to be diving into the switcher. Now, I've got my program right here. This is what us as video directors are looking at on the weekend. Got some meters and stuff, that's not important. I've also got my multi-viewer recording as well, which you'll be able to see. And I have my ATEM software control over here so that you can see the buttons that I am pressing. So I'm going to attempt to layer all this on top of each other. We'll see how that goes. But that being said, let's jump into this video and talk about how the switcher works. And I'm not going to go into detail on this specific switcher, but rather I'm going to talk about switchers as a whole and things that you would generally find on any switcher, regardless of what brand or model. So there may be things that I don't talk about in this video that you have on your switcher. And there may be things I do talk about in this video that you don't have on your switcher. But the idea is these are general things that would mostly apply to most switchers. Again, there may be ones that don't have some of these features. There may be ones that have more features than what I talk about. But what I do want to talk about are the main functions of a switcher, how you use it, and then we'll kind of talk about how it does some of those things that it does. But that being said, let's talk about what a switcher is at its most basic level and the workflow of how it functions, right? So a switcher at the most basic level is a piece of equipment that is designed to take multiple different video inputs, video sources, and basically decide, it takes multiple different inputs and decides what to put as its output. And so it can have a lot of different things running into it, and it just, whatever the director tells it to do, it will decide and display that as an output. It can be very basic. It can be, there are switchers out there that actually mechanically will make wire connections internally that will basically allow one video input to pass through as its output, and you can change whatever that looks like. And then there are some that are super complicated that can do a lot of things. You know, sports broadcasting and news broadcasting, a lot of the processing that's done there is done within the switcher and the computer that it's hooked up to. So a lot of things that a switcher can do just depends on the, a lot of things a switcher can do. It just depends on how you're using it. That being said, let's talk about the workflow just a little bit. I mentioned it has a lot of inputs. Generally speaking, the switcher is going to take all of its inputs or anything that provides it with a video feed. That can look like cameras, which I have, can also look like computers, which I have as well, and you'll see some of that in a second. But anything that provides a video feed to the switcher is considered an input. The switcher then takes that and can layer it on top of each other if it has the ability to do so. And then once it's done layering things, it will go to transitions. It will make transitions from one video feed to the next, or even a whole layer of video feeds to a whole new, separate layer of video feeds. And then finally, it will send things to outputs. Some switchers only have one output where, it's just sending things out. Some switchers have a ton of outputs. My switcher here has one main output. It's got a multi-viewer output, and then it's got 6 auxiliary outputs where it can send different things to each of those outputs. So it's technically got 8 outputs. It can send 8 different things out to 8 different places. So there's a lot of things that you can do with a switcher. Just depends on, again, how you are trying to use it. That being said, let's jump into a few of the most basic things that a switcher does. First of all, right down here, we have our preview bus. So on my screen, the left side of the screen is my preview. That's why it's got some lines over there. It says ME1 preview. It is allowing me to preview my shots before they are live. You can see in my main camera feed here that I have, this is what's live, right? And then that's what's live now. This is what's going online. This is what's going to the screens in the room. This is what's going pretty much everywhere. So this is live, and that allows me to preview what I am looking at before I make a cut. So this is my preview bus, and you can see it down here. My program bus is at the top. Anything that's red is considered live at the time. There can be lots of things that are red, but we are going to be looking specifically at my preview, my program, and my next transition box. So That being said, let's jump into the first element, which I'm going to talk about is transitions. Transitions are a way for your switcher to switch from one shot or layer of shots to a new shot or layer of shots. And there's a lot of different ways that you can do that. You can switch from having no shots layered on top of each other to having up to 4 shots layered on top of each other, plus a background shot, so 5, at least on my switcher. And there are, you could do down from 5 to 1. There's a lot of things you can do with a switcher. It depends on, again, how you are using it. That being said, let's talk about the types of transitions. First and foremost being a cut transition. That's a cut. You're just literally switching from one to the next, right? That's all a cut transition is. There is no time between these cuts. There's no fade. There is no nothing. You're just telling the switcher, switch immediately from one to the next. That's all a cut transition is. Up next, we have a fade transition, or a mix transition. This is going to mix the 2 shots together, and it's going to slowly fade one in while it fades the other out. That's what a mix transition is. Now, there are 2 ways you can do this. One through a T-bar, which is where you have manual control over that speed, and then you have the auto fade or auto transition, which is going to run the transition at a predetermined rate, which is, as you can see in the software, 1 second right now, which is 24 frames at what I'm doing. And you can actually see it count those frames as it goes along. Perfect. So that is a mixed transition. We also have a dip transition, which is going to look like this. Notice how it didn't fade straight from one shot to the next. It actually faded to black before it made it to that second shot. That's a dip transition, and what it's doing is it's dipping from shot A to a color and then to shot B. So that's all a dip transition is, similar to a fade, but it's actually adding an extra step in the process of a new color to fade into. Up next, we're going to talk about a wipe transition. A wipe transition is, think about Star Wars, right? Star Wars uses a transition like this all the time. That's a wipe transition. You are basically wiping across the screen, or wiping one shot onto the other. And that's a wipe transition. Very easy to understand. There's a lot of different types of wipes. Some switchers don't have these. Some have even more than I have. I can do a lot of different types of wipes with this switcher. But it doesn't matter how many types you have. That's what a wipe transition is. Up next, we have a DVE transition. Now, this one is very processor heavy, and it's not very commonly used, but it does have capabilities. This is a DVE transition. Notice how it is moving shot A through physical space. It's not just, when I wiped, it wasn't moving that shot, it's just wiping another shot on top of it. Whereas with the DVE, it's physically moving a shot around the screen, which takes a lot of processing power to do that live. And so it's one that some switchers are limited in its capability to do that. Now, my switcher has a lot of different types of ways that it can wipe. See, even that one, it's not wiping, it is actually just pushing that shot, still moving it through physical space. This is a squeeze transition. Notice how it's physically squishing that shot in. Takes a lot of processing power to do some of those transitions. Here's like a flip. Again, a lot of different things that you can do. I'm not going to use that though. That's not a very common transition. It's not one that you'll use very frequently, but it does have the capability of doing it. The last transition is called a stinger transition. And I don't have that set up because we will literally never use that transition here, only because it's used more in a sports broadcasting or news broadcasting environment where you are flying a logo or a picture or a graphic on screen, making a cut behind that graphic, and then flying that logo back out. Great example of this is if you're watching SportsCenter and you have your commentators sitting at a desk and they're cutting to maybe highlight footage. Instead of just making a cut, which is super abrupt and unexpected, what they'll do is fly a logo in, cut underneath that transition, fly that logo out. And what that's doing is it's kind of tying those two elements together by using that logo. And it's hiding that transition behind the logo. Great way to kind of show, hey, this is a new scene, a new location, but it's hard to do that when you are live. In movies, you can just add shots that kind of give you, add establishing shots that give you context. Live, you can't do that. So you use logos and you use ways to get around that. That's not ever going to be used here at Faith Promise, at least for the most part. There might be some rare cases where we do, but we're probably not going to use that transition here. And chances are, unless you're doing a sports broadcast, you're probably not going to use that as well. Most common transitions, for us at least, are cut. Every now and then we'll use a fade. I have never in my personal career used a dip transition, at least not seriously. I have also never used intentionally a wipe transition. I have done it before. It was not on purpose. It didn't look great. That being said, let's get into the next part, which is about keyers. So keyers are a way that you can layer shots on top of each other. Now, the reason that they're called keyers instead of layers is because they have to do a little bit of processing to remove unwanted parts of the image. Because here's what happens if you layer two images on top of each other. You only see the one on top. And that's because the way that computers work is they send a raw signal out that just has black, right? It just sends a signal. Even if you tell it, hey, I don't want these parts of the image, video lines are not very advanced. They don't have a way to send a transparent color. They can only send RGB values. So when you layer shots on top of each other, you're just going to get whatever shot is on top, and everything that's not used is going to be black. So you have to tell the switcher to remove certain parts of the image, and that is done through keying parts of the image out. Let's talk about how that works. In my switcher here, I am receiving two separate inputs. You can see here, ProPresenter fill and ProPresenter key. Fill is my fill source and key is my key source. What this is doing is the fill source is this image that you're seeing right here. It is just a boring image. It doesn't have anything cut out of it. It's got the lyrics where they need to go, and then everything else is just black because that's all that we're telling it to do. And we can send colors, we can send information on that other than just lyrics, but that's what that looks like right here. Now, in order to cut out the parts of the image we don't want and see something like this, we have to tell the switcher what parts of the image to remove. Now, you can go in here to my key source and I can just say, hey, remove black from the image, please. And all that's going to do is it's going to cut out everywhere where you see black on ProPresenter. And that works. I mean, you can see the lyrics. It looks okay, but you can get a little bit more advanced with a key. So what we're doing when we're sending when we're sending a key to the switcher is we're sending two separate images. One is my fill, the other is my key. Hey guys, Isaac here in post, and I didn't love the explanation I gave of fill and key, so I'm going to give you a better example, hopefully, right here, and show you visually as well. So I just talked about in the video sending two different sources to your switcher, and that is how a Luma key works. You have to send a fill source, which is your visual information. You can see that on the left. And then you're going to send a key source, which is not visual information, but rather processing information. And so you can see that on the right. So what the switcher is going to do is, and I'll show you here, it's going to layer these two sources on top of each other, just like this here. And it's going to tell the switcher, basically, I want you to cut out what is in black, and I want you to keep what's highlighted in white. And when it layers those two on top of each other, it almost treats it like a stencil, again, removing the dark parts of the image and keeping the bright parts of the image, which you can then see creates transparent layers. And you can then take the completed image and layer it on top of whatever video that you want. And that is how we do our lyrics and graphics here, is we remove the parts of the image that we don't want by sending a separate key source. That is how keys work, and they can get confusing very quickly. So I'm not going to try and over-explain them. So that is why you have to have keys instead of just layering videos on top of each other. Because again, you're just going to get a blank image for what's on top unless you tell the switcher what to remove. Now, there are other types of keys. We have Luma key is the most common, where you're sending 2 video lines into the switcher to give it the information it needs. But you can also get away with doing a chroma key. Chroma keys are green screen keys. Anywhere that you see a green screen on live TV is some form of chroma key. What it's telling the switcher, instead of sending it 2 separate video lines, it's telling it, look for this specific color and remove the color from the image, leaving everything that is not that color. Again, that's how green screens work, especially in a live setting. The benefit of using a chroma key over a Luma key is anywhere you have complex movements, right? Or you have complex shapes, a weatherman in front of a green screen. When you have people moving around in a frame, covering up parts of the image, it's not easy to try and key that out with a Luma key, because you'd have to have something tracking the person and guessing where they're at and making silhouettes and cutouts. It's just not going to work. Easiest thing to do is use a chroma key in that case. Now, we also have a pattern key, which is very, very simple, very, very basic. This is what a pattern key looks like. You're taking one source and you're cropping the image to wherever you like. So this is great if maybe you don't have the equipment to do a chroma key and you still want to do lyrics or lower thirds or something like that. You can create a graphic that is in maybe the bottom 25% of the frame, and then you can just make a pattern key that cuts out, the bottom or the top 75%. Then that's how that's one way you could do that. There's a lot of different types of pattern keys available out there. And essentially you're just cutting out portions of the image based on what pattern you use. So that's what a pattern key is. Last type of key is a DVE key. I'm not going to get into the specifics, but basically you are using a lot more processing power to manipulate that key around the frame like you would with a DVE transition, only it's doing it constantly and it requires a lot of processing power. Let's talk about how we can transition from one key to the next, and how we can transition our shots. So we talked about transitions, we talked about keys, now let's merge them all together. I said earlier, switchers can switch from a whole layer of shots to a whole new layer of shots, and that's done through your next transition box, which is right here. It's also on my switcher in physical buttons. The way that this works is you are telling your switcher, on my next transition, I want to transition everything that I have highlighted in yellow. You'll notice that my preview will update based on what I'm clicking. Now, I don't have anything assigned to key 1 and 2 right now, so I'm going to ignore them. But what I'm doing is I'm telling my switcher, hey, on the next transition, change what is in yellow. In my case, all I have right now highlighted is the background. So I'm just changing the background. I'm not doing anything with the key that's currently on. I'm not doing anything with other keys that are currently off because I've not told the switcher to change them. But if I wanted to turn a key off, even if I fade, that's also a transition, both cut and fade. But if I click this here, look at how my preview has now changed to where there are no lyrics on it. And so if I cut, it turns the lyrics off. Now you'll see, now in my preview, the lyrics are there because I'm still telling the switcher, on my next transition, I want you to toggle the background and I want you to toggle key 3. Key 3 are where my lyrics are at. So every time I click this, it's going to toggle them on and off. And every time I fade it, it's going to do the same thing. Even if I switch to other shots, here's 1, but here's camera 2. Now it's turned it off. Let's go to 3, back to 1. Now it's off, on. That's how it works. Every time you hit a transition, if these are activated, if they're highlighted, it will toggle them on or off. So let's get reset. So now we're back to where it's just changing the background. Now I can tie a lot of things together. So now notice how, let me just show you. Key 4 is the same lyrics key, but I have moved it to a new position. So there's key 3, here's key 4. So what I can do is I can actually tell the switcher, I want you to toggle the background, which we can see there is camera 3, but then I want you to turn key 3 off and key 4 on. When I make this cut, it's going to fade. It's going to do exactly what I tell it to do. It's going to change the background, obviously, but you'll notice it turned key 3 off because I tied it to the transition, and it turned key 4 on because I attached it to the transition as well. And that I can do however I want to tell it. So if I tell the switcher everything, I want you to toggle everything, you'll notice it turns 1 and 2 on, 4 on, but 3 off because it was already on air. Now that can get confusing quickly, but essentially what you're telling the switcher to do is everything that's highlighted in yellow, I want you to toggle to its opposite state. So background is just going to toggle to what is in your preview. Your keys are going to toggle whether they are on or off. So if they're already on, they'll toggle off. If they're already off, they will toggle on. There is also a way where you can just transition the keys. So if you'll notice I have camera 1 selected. Now in my preview and program, it just has key 3 live because it's on air, and key 4 is in my preview, but it's the same shot. And that's because I've told the switcher, don't change the background, just change 3 and 4, toggle 3 and 4 at the same time. And since one is on and one is off, it's just swapping which ones are on and off. So that's how you transition keys. And if that's confusing, go back and rewatch it and try and really understand how the switcher is doing what it's doing. But that is how switchers will layer shots on top of each other, is through keyers, how it will transition from one to the next, different types of transitions, and how you can actually make a transition more than just cutting from shot to shot. You can transition to a whole lot of different things. You know, if you're using keys in different ways than we are, you can potentially transition a lot of things at the same time. Switchers are very powerful tools, and there's a lot that they can do. That being said, that's really most of it. There's one other thing that I'll talk about, which is outputs. Switchers have usually a main output, which is usually called the program output, which is what's on this screen here. There are also additional outputs that you can select on most switchers called aux outputs or auxiliary outputs. These are a way to send different feeds to different areas. In my case, aux1 is just a mirror of ME1, which is my main mix effects 1. I also have aux2, 3, 4, 5, 6, which are all sending different signals to these different areas. So auxes are ways that you can change what's going where, and how you do that can get kind of confusing, but essentially it's a way to allow you to do more than one thing with your switcher at a time. So that is going to be the end of this video. I know it was a long one, and I know it's confusing, and there was a lot that we covered, but it's very helpful to understand these concepts regardless of what switcher you're working on, because knowing how they work and knowing what they do is going to, 1, help you solve problems if you run into them, and 2, help you best use your switcher. So again, that's the end of this video. Thank you for watching. In the next one, we're going to dive into coloring, exposing cameras, things like that, which is, again, a topic that is not covered very well, or at least a lot, on the internet. So I'm excited for that one. Definitely come back and check it out. But that's all for this one. Thanks, guys.